which they didn't think was fair. And after the revolution, the government was forced to increase taxes, such as ones on alcohol and imports, in order to pay off the war. But then, because the country was still under the Article of Confederation, they were unable to force the states to pay off these debts from the revolution because they had absolutely no power over them. So later on, they all met at the Constitutional Convention with the intention to revise the Articles of Confederation to make them more productive and to give the government more power and to make it more centralized. But instead of revising the Articles of Confederation, they ended up just writing a completely new government for America. So they formed the Constitution, which was based off a series of compromises, starting with the Great Compromise, which developed the Senate and the House of Representatives, because larger states, such as in the Virginia Plan, wanted votes to be based on population, while smaller states wanted it to be based on equal representation so that they would have just as much as a say. So the Senate and the House were formed. The 3/5 Compromise was also part of the Constitution, which basically only allowed 3/5 of the black population to vote. And lastly was the Bill of Rights. The Founding Fathers were unsure whether they were going to be able to get the Constitution passed. So in order to do so, they promised that they would pass the Bill of Rights afterwards, adding on amendments and rights that people thought that they should have. Okay, Washington's presidency included many strengths, among which he proclaimed neutrality, which was a big deal at the time, and he was a good leader and he was known for his military leadership, and the public had a lot of faith in him. He also had a really, really strong cabinet with a lot of strong leaders in it who played a part in his administration as well as future administrations. Two biggies were Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. During that time, Hamilton he's big on financial reform, so he created the Bank of the United States, which allowed the United States to get their economy under control and develop it more. And in his report on public credit, he outlined a plan for the federal government to eliminate all federal debts and state debts remaining from the Revolution by borrowing money. And he also passed a tariff of 1784, which put a 5% tax on all imports. His financial reform plans were very controversial, though, because a lot of people doubted that they would work, and they also heavily benefited the rich.
Okay, so Chapter 6 was about Jeffersonian democracy, and in general, his policy as president his main thing was that he believed that government was evil at all levels at its best, and he was really worried that the nation's debt would make them slave to creditors, and he also tried to fix the judiciary system. And one of the main things that was really important that happened during this time period was the Marbury versus Madison court case, which involved the midnight judges that Adams appointed, and the overall result of it was the judicial review became law. And another thing that happened during his presidency was the Barbary Pirates incidents, in which former presidents had been paying the pirates to not attack American ships for years, but President Jefferson thought this was a spineless move, so he decided to attack the pirates so that he wouldn't have to pay them bribe money anymore. And another big thing that he did during his presidency was the Louisiana Purchase, in which he sent Robert R. Livingston as his minister to France, which was originally just to ensure that their rights in the New Orleans, Louisiana area would stay the same, but it ended up being him purchasing the Louisiana Purchase from France because France needed money to make up their war debts, and they had also lost interest in North America because of their conflict in Haiti, and it cost $15 million for the entire purchase. And another thing that happened during his presidency was that the Federalists were discredited because they threatened to secede from the nation, but it turned out to be a joke because they didn't get any votes. And there was a duel between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, and Burr was a Federalist leader, and he killed Hamilton. And there was also the Lewis and Clark expedition, and they were sent by Jefferson to explore the Louisiana Purchase, and they obtained a lot of important information about the resources that were in the Rockies and also in the more southern areas of the Purchase. And he also sent later people to explore the area, but they weren't nearly as productive as Lewis and Clark. And another major problem that happened during this era that Jefferson handled was impressment, which was where the British were taking people off of U.S. ships and making them fight for Great Britain in their war because they claimed that U.S. citizens were descendants of the British, so they were, in general, British citizens. And they should fight for their countries. And they also took items from the U.S. ships, and America eventually got them to stop doing that. And there was also the Embargo Act, in which all trade with other countries was completely outlawed, and it caused the national economy to crash, but it also caused a lot of illegal smuggling between Canada and the northeastern states.
So I'm doing Chapter 7, National Growing Pains, and Madison was president, and during the beginning of his presidency, there was a lot of Indian rebellions going on. And one of the biggest ones was the Battle of Tippecanoe. And this is with the two main Indians, Tecumseh and his brother, which they called the Prophet. And Tecumseh was really the genius behind everything, and if the Indians had waited for him to come and fight and lead, they probably could have succeeded, but they didn't, and the Prophet decided to take control, and it pretty much put an end to the Indians' resistance. And the next big topic is the War of 1812, and some big people in this were the War Hawks, which were the younger leaders of the Congress, and they were for war against Great Britain. But a lot of people felt there were many ties that connected us to Great Britain, like our culture, and we kind of relied on them for a lot of stuff. But furthermore, there were a lot of causes that led to us fighting them, like land hunger, a sense of national honor, agricultural depression, and violations of neutral rights. So in the end, we decided to fight, and the Federalists the Federalists opposed the war, while the Anti-Federalists before it, and then there were a lot of U.S. military failures during it. But the war ended in the Treaty of Ghent, where there was status quo antebellum, which means that everything went back to the way it was before the war had started. And another big point was the Battle of New Orleans, which pretty much brought up the people knowing about Andrew Jackson and his great military skills. And then the Transcontinental Treaty allowed us to define boundaries along the 42nd parallel, and we also gained Florida from Spain. And then the Monroe Doctrine, which officially declared independence from Great Britain. There were a lot of causes for this, and a few of them were Russian colonization of the Pacific coast, concern of Spanish expansion in the Caribbean, the threat of European recolonization in Latin America, and British interest in commercial opportunities in Latin America. And the next part is the era of good feelings, which during this time there was a really good economy, there was no divisions between the politics and stuff, so everything was pretty much good during the times. And a lot of this was because there was the kind of moral victory, not really a victory, of the War of 1812 and economic prosperity. So Republicans adopted the Federalist Program, and also Republicans adopted the Federalist Program, and Monroe's presidential style kind of helped a lot of people feel good. And then the Panic of 1819 contributed to the collapse of the economy after the era, and it kind of signified the end of the era. and prices fell dramatically. And some big leaders during this time for the North were John Quincy Adams, who became president, Daniel Webster, and Martin Van Buren. And for the South, it was John C. Calhoun and William H. Crawford. And for the West, it was Henry Clay. And there was also the Missouri Compromise, which made Missouri a slave state and Massachusetts a free state. And this also kind of just it allowed slavery prohibited in all other parts of Louisiana Purchase north of the 36th latitude, but still didn't really end the controversy over slavery.
I'm going to take you on a journey to a nationalist economy. It all started when there was gentility and the Consumer Revolution. People started buying things in America, and this was huge. This was a breakthrough for our economy. And because a lot of people started buying things, there was the birth of the American factory. Now, with this factory, there was Lowell's Waltham system. And this kind of made women as factory workers. And so it kind of brought the idea on as our workers like slaves, because they're getting paid pennies on the hour, and they're getting bad rights and stuff, and the conditions suck. And it kind of like made us think, are we an industrial proletariat? And so that was this really big debate that went on, but a lot of people ended up forgetting about it for some odd reason. But anywho, this birth of the factory kind of led to a lot of Irish and German immigrants coming to America because they thought, hey, we get a better life now, let's jump on this deal and kind of ride the waves to freedom. And so they're like, yeah, let's do this. So they come to America, and then they start moving into these little houses, kind of apartments called tenements. And so what started to happen was the women and the children would start escaping from these factories. So a lot of factory owners started putting these Irish and German immigrants into the factories. Because the birth of the factory, corporations began to rise up from the ground. And these corporations rose up because not only of the factories, but because there wasn't a lot of capital to start these factories. So a lot of people came together and started their own business or their own corporations, or the wealthiest people would come and they'd start their own corporations with their own factories. And they would use this to make tons of money, and it would soon become known as monopolies with these corporations because no one else could afford them. And so actually these people who had a lot of money actually kind of developed this transportation system, and the private investors who owned the turnpikes, they actually started producing these new and improved highways, and these highways were funded by the government. And that was such a big deal because there was a lot of, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Emily, help me out here. It starts with a C, and corruption, of course. Corruption in society and in the government. Boss Tweed, for example. You'll learn about him later on. But anyways, back to the corporations. I'm sorry. Back to the corporations. They were just such a big deal. And also, slavery was kind of coming back up again and starting to become big, all because of a man named Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. And this was just such a big deal because we never seen anything like it. It could turn cotton into fabric so fast, and we actually needed a lot more slaves to help this cotton gin work because it would allow us not to do it by hand anymore. And the more cotton gins you have, the more cotton you need, so you needed more slaves to go out in the fields and pick this cotton. And that was just such a big deal because we brought in more slaves from Africa. But at the time, the American Colonization Society didn't want that. They actually wanted to send the slaves to Liberia in Africa to start their own colony, an all-black colony, and make slavery illegal and send the African Americans back to where they came from, which is, of course, Africa. Now, with transportation in the turnpikes, there's also transportation in the canals, and the canals led to the development of the steamboat. And the steamboat actually made New Orleans the world's biggest major port. I mean, it was such a big port, and it led to a lot of trading with America and a lot of good things that helped America's population boom, or America's economy boom.